It's 3 p.m. and we have started day 2 of RADARSERES 2020, a 3-day encounters, a labor of love, a year in the making, hundreds of conversation with every one of you to determine which are the issues that must be discussed in terms of social impact of corporation. It's wonderful to see how many of you are joining in this event, not only companies, but NGOs, and there are students, foundations, media, and representatives of the public administration. RADARSERES 2020 for the first time is digital and free. This is a too important matter to keep it for specialists. And the themes of this year is purpose-driven companies for a world that has changed. And it's obvious that pandemics is influencing the themes and the program. This gathering is brought to you by Ceres Foundations. And for those of you who are not familiar with Ceres Foundation, I only want to say that Ceres Foundation was created 11 years ago with an essential principle in mind. Companies must work for all society, not only shareholders. Companies must put the person in the middle, this in the center. This was not easy to assimilate 11 years ago. Believe us, we had to, knock at the door of the company to explain to them that this was important and they needed to prioritize these concepts. Today, Ceres agglutinates around 150 Spanish companies, all of them with a responsible DNA, and which represent 35% of the Spanish gross domestic product and 70% of IBEX 35. Ceres Foundation supports them with different ways, with knowledge, with methodologies, with metrics, with platform of collaboration and innovation, and with a recognition of the role of the leader, the CEO, the chairman. The leader makes sure that transformation really happens. She gives examples, she inspires, and she makes herself and everybody else accountable. So yesterday we dedicated our first day precisely to this principle. We saw 4 leaders adapt, and also we saw a lot of humanity and commitment in this moment of challenge, hard challenge. Today we will listen to experts and academics from USA. I'm Antonella Broglia, by the way. I will be the host for today, or the hostess, and I will moderate this session, which is fully in English. But before to start, let me thank our 4 allies. Without them, this event would be truly impossible. Atlantic Copper, GSK, Repsol Foundation, and Santander. Thank you very, very much for your support. So, global trends, no ideas, roadmap for change. This is what we have in store for you this afternoon, till 4:30, sharp. And we start with a dear friends of ours, a dear partner of ours, Daryl Brewster, CEO of CECP, an organization which is pretty similar to Ceres, as we will soon see. CECP agglutinates more than 200 CEOs that believe that corporations can really be a force for good. The chairman of Ceres Foundation, Paco Roman, will have a conversation with Daryl around the response of both US and Spanish companies to the challenge of the pandemics. Paco, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Antonella. Thanks, everybody. Welcome, everybody. It's great to hear that so many of you are there, and thanks to the panelists. You said it. CECP and Ceres, in a way, have the same goal, and we work together. So I want to remark the importance of collaboration, which is something that it's so important these days, and all of us talk about it. And we both belong, and in fact, I would say that you, CECP, are the locomotive of this, to global exchange, a big move, international big move, driving long-term business success through positive social impact. So first of all, let me say hello to Daryl. Daryl, hey, it's great to have you here today.
Great. Thank you, Paco. And buenos tardes y gracias por esta gran invitación. While we are separated by many miles during this virtual event, we are really connected together in the belief that the world's leading companies, and so many of those are in Spain, can and should be a force for good in society. And our two organizations, as you mentioned, have such similar goals. We're founded around the same time, believe in metrics, believe in engaging the capital markets to truly work together to build a better world through business. So thank you so much. And next year, we'll be back in Madrid.
Thanks to you, Daryl. And I have to say, the only mistake we've made today is that this conversation should have happened in Spanish. I've seen your Spanish; it's excellent. So, well, we are missing this opportunity, right? So let's stay in English. Yeah, you know, Antonella said Ceres started 11 years ago, and the world in this respect was very different. We have seen a big contextual change. I would say today there's a culture of purpose. Today everybody talks about purpose. It's famous, Larry Fink's a sense of purpose, the letter, all those things, right? I would say the difference is that we work on that purpose every day. Day and night, all the days of the year, right? And we have been doing so for many, many years. What Ceres is, Antonella described it, 150 companies, 70% of the IBEX 35, 30% of the GDP, so important representation. And representing social commitment of companies and focus on a strategy with a pragmatic approach and giving importance to innovation. What do? We help and go with companies in their transformation journey, trying to help them to increase a positive social impact. And during these 11 years, we have seen important changes. First, we have seen that companies really want to assume this role. They do want. Second, we have seen a move from a journey from a philanthropic approach to a much more share value, which was at the beginning of Ceres the original approach. We said, yeah, that's what we believe in. Third, that their leaders have acted as starters of the transformation. I would say leadership matters, because otherwise things don't happen in the companies. Four, a big, and I'm talking about Spain, big involvement of employees. Maybe we are not so participative outside the companies. However, voluntaries are important, and involvement of those employees is important. And five, enterprise look for sharing knowledge, sharing best practices, learning from each other, developing tools, measuring, giving importance to KPIs, etc., which is part of the role of Ceres. That's what we do. So that's what I would say about these years and Ceres. But you are older, not you, but your organization is older than ours, right? And since 1999, I believe, when Paul Newman was one of the founders, right? That's amazing, and it's an important thing. But you've been so close to companies and to their role that I would love to hear from you what the evolution has been and what has changed in the American field regarding companies and their approach.
Sure. Thank you, Paco. Yes, CECP was founded a little over 20 years ago, and we haven't been as fast at this as you have been in Spain. In fact, we've learned a lot through the global exchange from Spain and our other 18 partners around the globe to really help us to share these views. When CECP started, those letters stood for the Committee Encouraging Corporate Philanthropy, as you said, Paco. That was the focus back there in last century. When I took over about 7 or 8 years ago, having been a public company CEO previously, like yourself, we just went to the letters. That way we could save on our business cards. We just said CECP. And to recognize the changes we've gone through to purpose-driven leadership, we evolved and changed our name a couple of years ago to keep the letters, save the money on the business cards, and that stands for Chief Executives for Corporate Purpose. So we are very much aligned on those goals, and we have really seen an evolution during those during that time frame. And we believe that's really come because companies, through that innovation you've talked about, emerging and established companies have become bigger. 69 of the 100 largest economic units in the world are companies, not countries. Think about that. Big, and companies like Walmart are bigger than most of the countries in the world. And in a world where we see, I think, too much partisan political populism in the political realm, business really has that very important role to step up, to really talk about, to evolve, to improve our institutions, and really drive sustainable success over time, not just from election to election or so. So we really have seen with that growth in companies, the expectations have risen. So people, citizens around the world, 4 out of 5, the number is even a little higher in Spain, according to the Edelman Trust Barometer, believe that a company can make a profit, but also do good in the world. And we think that combination is so powerful. In fact, our belief in the future is you will make money because you do good in the world. And that becomes an important factor. And of course, the research that we both see, we talk about, is so important. And it reinforces that view that companies that are run broadly for its stakeholders and for the longer term, its stakeholders and sustainably outperform over time. They actually do better financially. And of course, efforts like CSR, letters that didn't exist, or ESG, are now part of the lexicon in business. So we think that the move that you're seeing in Spain, we're seeing in the US and around the globe is here. It is here to stay. And particularly during the COVID challenges that we face, the global pandemic, it is just so important that companies can really step up and are stepping up to truly build a better world through business.
Yeah, you said it. I mean, big responsibility for companies because their impact is immense. In other words, civil society is key in determining our future, the future of all of us. No, and we completely agree with you with this approach, and that's why I mentioned this share value approach. You can do. You can impact positively the society and at the same time create a return value for your company. And in that way, you create a virtuous cycle reinforcing itself for the good of everybody. So, but you mentioned what we are living these days, this COVID-19 thing, which is a big shake, in maybe even a big reset for many things. No? And we have seen what companies have done here, and the reaction have been extremely positive, keeping business on, taking care of people, reacting and contributing positively to society, etc. We try to be very active and help companies to do so. There are 2 initiatives I would like to mention and share with you. The first one is something we call Seres Responsables, Seres Responsible. It's a 360 initiative. It encourages cooperation to solve specific needs, right? So very pragmatic. And there are more than 400 projects combining the participation of some companies, NGOs, entrepreneurs, leaders, maybe some institutions, etc. But again, solutions, that's common sense. Practical solutions for real problems that you have, right? So more than 400 projects. It has been very successful. We took also another angle, which is we wanted to have the point of view of the main leaders in Spain, entrepreneurial leaders, right? And so we started weekly brief dialogues with the top managers of the main companies. And so far we have had 30 something, and we keep going on, right? And the focus was COVID crisis, looking ahead. What is important here is the future. So the past is just to learn from. And so learnings from the past, how to build, and considerations about leadership. And you know what? All of them, without any exceptions, mention the importance of having purpose in the reconstruction, to do it around values, all of them emphasize the importance of soft skills. I said before, leadership matters. This is true, and leadership matters because people matters. And if you don't lead, then you don't take care of people, you don't help, etc. And yeah, people matters. I have to say that within those 400 projects, maybe 60%, or I don't know, a very high percentage is dedicated to help vulnerable people in a way or another. So that sensitivity, that's and that's the role in crisis of companies. I wonder what have you done, probably similar things. And my question to you is, learnings you can share with us, good practices, something you want to mention specifically during this crisis that unfortunately has not ended.
Sure. Yeah, the similarities again between what the good work that you're doing at CECP and what we're also looking to do in the US are remarkable. And it's really great that we can learn from each other as part of the global exchange. We are very firmly, it's our last name is purpose. We just published a paper last week on the notion of the return on purpose, and the companies that really have embraced purpose have outperformed in the marketplace. They've outperformed with their customers, with their employees, with their investors, and have done so during the COVID crisis as well. So we think that purpose focus is just so important, and moving it just from words to action and having specific programs. Similar to you, we really look at 4 areas that we can help our companies really progress against this notion of stakeholder capitalism. One of those is providing the research, like our paper on return on purpose. So having the research out there that shows how companies, with the data, with the metrics, how companies are making a difference in the world and how they can learn from each other. The second real important area we find are those case studies, those examples that we can provide to companies. Some want to see the numbers, some want to see the qualitative action about how companies are working and partnering together to truly make a difference in the world. And with those two, creating frameworks so that are tools, if you will, solutions so that companies can work together. Leadership, like you say, is critical. You know, we have well over 200 plus CEOs that are part of CECP. They represent about 7 trillion US, 6 trillion euros in annual turnover. So these are big enterprises. I think we'd be the 3rd largest economic unit in the world, other than the United States and China. Now, obviously, not all our companies work together all the time, but I can assure you, neither do the United States at this juncture. So some work to do on those areas, but leadership's really important. And like yourselves, we've now gone to regular conversations with our CEOs, bring them together around topics like social justice. Next week, we'll have the CEO of Bank of America talking about ESG. We have another in December coming up with another of our CEOs. She'll be speaking from Guardian Life, a member of our board. We'll be speaking about the future of work. So we think that engagement with CEOs is so critical because some of the work we're doing during the global pandemic is happening in real time. We don't have the history of what do you do in this. So we need to share and learn in real time with each of those efforts. And the following, these all connect together, are providing platforms like this for companies to have those discussions, to share those best practices and leadership pieces so that they can really make progress against the stakeholders they've had. And we've seen companies step up, whether it's with employees or their customer base, and particularly with their communities, as you mentioned, over the last number of months, and companies that have invested substantially money, people, and time. One that's very important to us in the US at this juncture is social justice. It's a long-standing American issue, dates back centuries. And one of the groups we're really proud to partner with is CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion. We're a pledge signee. We have over 1,000 organizations in the US that are lined up so that, again, we can share those best practices about how do we build a more inclusive, more diverse, and a higher performing workforces. And so those types of collaborative efforts we think are just really critical here as we move forward. And the openness of companies to engage in those continues to increase.
Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Daryl. Yeah, it is so important, this learning aspect, right? If I'm being very, very honest, I think that when we started with CERES, the first aim was to learn from each other, right? And we said, we are creating a campus, some kind of whatever, university or whatever, just for companies to learn in a matter which is unexplored, and there are no many people to learn from. And now I mean, what is important in life is the future. Always what you have to do is more important than what you have done, right? So it's time to think ahead in big terms, with the big picture as a society. If you want, in a microcosmos, as every business, and so on. And there are a few things that are very clear and come from those conversations with leaders, like the importance of keeping our people safe, maintaining our people safe, building or rebuilding reliable operation, rebuilding it, understanding the new environment, which is very different, and all of those things supporting our communities. No? So it's time for a strategy. And again, I'm re-emphasizing that those leaders said, yeah, a strategy has to be built based on values and purpose. And something that is important, if you talk about the strategy, the first step is clearly to understand the environment in a broad sense. What is happening in the world, what is affecting you, that means what is affecting the global world. And that means to talk to and listen to as many stakeholders that you can identify. The times for identifying very few stakeholders, just investors or shareholders, etc., is completely out, because otherwise your strategy will be incomplete and it will be a failure. Part of it is investors. That's by the way, it's important for us, because I think that we came a bit later than you to give importance to the investors community in that sense. Maybe the European side of the world is a bit arrive a bit later than the States. For us, it's important, for Ceres, it is important to bring value to the table in rebuilding this future. So we will continue doing what we are doing, trying to do it better every day. We will continue with the type of things that I mentioned, like these dialogues with CEOs, with the main leaders, and so on. We also have some CEO challenge, which is special panels on specific topics and these type of things. It is so important to have the top managers involved, because otherwise it will never be this social impact reflected and considered in the strategy. If you want it within the strategy, you need the involvement of the top guys. We will continue developing management tools for impact and for measuring. And something very important we have created is a new tool to help companies to develop their strategy based on purpose, to find the purpose and develop a strategy around. We call it RSC3. So all of these things mean that we will continue working on this, looking to be helpful to companies to build the future we want to build. And but we are talking about this crisis that we are living. How do you see the world, or how should we look at the new world after COVID? And how will be this transformation be for company, society, and, as we always say, no leaving anyone behind?
Thank you, Paco. And I think these are critical issues. Really, three trends that we see that are going to be critical as we move forward, and that we're already taking steps on, some of which we've touched on here. I think you'll hear more about those from Rebecca Henderson here in a few minutes, who's one of our heroes at CECP, sheroes, as they say. First is this notion of purpose-driven leadership. We've talked about that a lot, but it's moving from being something nice to do to something necessary. And that's the expectation of today's and the future's leaders. Are they going to be purpose-driven? That's the people, companies, the best people are going to want to work for, buy from, engage with, and collaborate with. So we think that's really key and will continue to be so. Second is collaborative efforts. And we touched on a few of those, like CEO Action, many of which you have 400 coming together, where companies can work together to solve pre-competitive issues. We think that is essential. Many of those may happen with government officials, they may happen with other nonprofits, but getting groups together to solve big issues, very few companies can solve the challenges we're seeing today on their own. The third area, and you hit it very clear, and we believe is really essential, is the notion of rewiring our capital markets. Our capital markets, particularly in the US, are simply too short-term oriented. There's a value to trading, it keeps liquidity in the market, but this is about investing. And who do you want to invest in for the long haul? So that's why CECP CEO Investor Forum is so critical, which we've talked about and delighted to talk more on as we move forward. But we think those issues are just going to be so critical for us as we go forward, and having specific tools, specific solutions that can really help our companies build a better world through business.
Thank you very much, Daryl. This is about cooperation. This is about social commitment. This is about leadership. This is about the connection between social progress and economic progress. And that's the goal for all of us. We will continue working on, we will continue cooperating. Thanks for being today with us. And I pass the floor to Antonella to continue with the agenda. Thanks again, Daryl. A real pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Antonella. Thank you all.
Thank you very much to both of you. We have so many things in common, much more things in common than the opposite. And also, in these terms, I would like to, give a special warm welcome to all our partners belonging to the global exchange networks, people that believe what we believe, people from Russia, welcome from Russia, from China, from South Africa, from Chile, bienvenidos de Chile, los amigos de Italia, buon pomeriggio, people from Israel, from Mexico, Brazil, and Germany. You're all so welcome with us at this RADARSERES 2020, a labor of love, 1 year in the making. Disruption, crisis, and alterations are opportunities for change. During this crisis, companies had to put the interests and well-being of their employees, their clients, their suppliers, and their communities at the center of their operation. They must. Can this response be the strategy forever? Not just under the COVID circumstances. Ladies and gents, let me introduce you our next speaker. He's Samuel C. Johnson Professor in Sustainable Global Enterprise and also Professor of Management at Cornell University. A true expert in triple bottom companies. His last book is wonderful, Better Business, How the B Corp movement is remaking capitalism. Ladies and gents, from New York, Christopher Marquis. Christopher, is a true honor. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much. And really, it's truly my honor to be part of this amazing event and really appreciate the very kind introduction. Much of the theme of my talk is going to follow on very much from Daryl about, creating investment markets that are more long-term, focusing on all stakeholders, and really, as we move out of this COVID situation, to be able to build back better. This is really the focus of my book called Better Business, as was introduced. It was written before COVID, but I think it's even more applicable afterwards. This idea of stakeholders, focusing on stakeholders is something that, before COVID had such tremendous groundswell of support, a lot of resonance. People are familiar probably with the Business Roundtable, announcement to focus on the purpose of companies, not just about shareholders and short term, but about all stakeholders, employees, communities, consumers. It seems like a lifetime ago, but even in January of this year, the World Economic Forum, not that long ago, actually was focused on stakeholder capitalism, and investors like Larry Fink, chair, founder of BlackRock, I think the largest private investor in the world, writing letters about companies needing purpose, needing to focus on sustainability. And these are all, I think, wonderful indicators of how leaders in business and investors are taking this very seriously. But it's a lot of talk. And I think that, I think talk is good as a first step, but I think that really to move beyond talk, we need to focus on action. And I think that, there's been a lot of early stage action through COVID. There's been some studies of the BRT companies, Business Roundtable companies, whether they are actually, implementing stakeholder capitalism or not. Some indications maybe they are, some indications maybe they aren't. But, I think that it's still early to tell. And I think that what the message of the book is that being stakeholder driven is sort of easier said than done. And while intentions are great, what we need are tools and processes to help actually make that happen. It's so easy to sort of slip back into the regular sort of old way of doing things. Greenwashing, where companies are sort of communicating they're doing wonderful things in the environment, but actually are not internally, is rampant. I think that many people in the world do not trust large companies. Through COVID and the Business Roundtable, case is an example. I feel bad for Marriott. It frequently gets sort of called out for this. Signed on to the Business Roundtable statements. COVID hits, they furlough 85% of their employees, which is understandable actually, because when businesses hit, if their business goes down 95%, of course, they can't necessarily be expected to keep all those employees on. But they ended up, at the same time paying out almost $200 million in dividends, putting in for a raise for their CEO. And so this is where I see things sort of out of balance between different stakeholders, and sort of the short-termism around just paying the shareholders really needs to change. So the book that I wrote, focuses very much on the different tools and processes, particularly around impact assessment and governance, to help companies align around stakeholder management. So, many examples throughout the book on B corporations. I highlight that work because this is a set of companies that has really sort of taken that to the next level. But I want to say that the message of the book is not that all companies should be B Corps. There are 3,500 B Corps in the world. And B Corp is a company that's certified for its social and environmental performance. Very rigorous certification, well-known companies, Patagonia, Ben & Jerry's, in Spain, one of the, Danone actually, Danone Spain was the first B Corp in Danone's portfolio, which I think is very nice given that Danone was founded actually in Barcelona, and Danone is an overall company, $30 billion company, has been sort of committed to becoming a B Corp by 2025. But the message of the book is that I think that it's wonderful to celebrate those companies, but not that all companies should be B Corps, but that there's tools and processes that have been developed that all companies can actually use, learn from, to become more stakeholder driven. So I'm going to talk about sort of 4 different pillars in some ways by which companies can implement some of these tools. So one is tracking, measuring, and being transparent. This is something that, I was sort of surprised at the Business Roundtable statements. Again, sort of, I really appreciate them putting attention on this, but they didn't really say anything about tracking, measurement, and how to do this. Larry Fink, I think, does a nice job of this, highlights the SASB, Sustainable Accounting Standards Board tools. That's an important set of tools where companies can actually report, measure and report on their sustainability objectives and achievements. Global Reporting Initiative is another one. These are important because they bring companies to public scrutiny, but also identify areas of improvement for them. This is why I actually titled the book Better Business, because so many of the companies that I talked to said, they got into this idea of becoming a B Corp because they wanted to improve their social and environmental management and performance. But really, at the end of it, they were a better business because they were able to benchmark with other companies' management processes. And really, these ESG frameworks are essentially management tools for long-term risk management and sustainability. So the B impact assessment, for instance, there may only be 3,500 B Corps, but over 100,000 companies actually use this to manage their ESG processes. For instance, the BDC, Business Development Bank of Canada, uses it to screen its screen its lendees. So if you a small business apply for a loan, you go through a sort of a version of the B impact assessment to sort of understand the strength of your management, the strength of your sustainability. Bank of Colombia in South America does the same thing. VC firms have embraced this. Mainstream VC firms from Kleiner Perkins, Sequoia, Google Ventures, all actually invested in B Corps. One story I just came across, interviewed the founder, CEO of a VC firm called Fifth Wall. This is a mainstream VC firm in the real estate space, and does some investment in sort of new retail. They invested in 2 B Corps, Allbirds and Cotopaxi. And the founder said to me, we learned about this idea of the certified social and environmental companies through our investees, we realized this is what we believe in too. So here, mainstream VC firm actually becomes a B Corp itself. And there's a few other examples of that. I think that, as these venture capital companies are becoming involved in this, it says sort of, number of years down the line, 3 to 5 years down the line, I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of attention in the public markets of these firms, because obviously these investors are going to want an exit at some point. And I think this is something that has really started to get traction already. So just in the last number of months, 3 B Corps went public, an online insurer, a sort of sustainable farming and egg company, and a vertical farm company. What I think is so this sort of is a new trend. What is even a bigger deal, I think, is that 3 companies during this time period have also changed their articles of incorporation to embed stakeholder principles in the legal foundation of the company, Danone being one of them, Amalgamated Bank in the US being another one, Danone obviously based in Paris. In these companies, they had shareholder votes to say, okay, we want to actually, in the articles of incorporation of our company, say we are, our purpose is beyond just shareholders. 99% passed. Viva Systems, which is a cloud computing company, recently filed with the SEC to change its incorporation to a benefit corporation, which I'll say a little bit about in a second. So again, this is going to be scrutiny of existing shareholders and having a vote. So, whereas it's great that companies went public, the people that invest in those companies know that what these companies are. I think that the fact that we're now having shareholder votes around purpose and purpose governance is tremendously, it's a turning point, I think, really in the support of these type of companies in the markets. So the second pillar I say a little bit about is this governance aspect I just mentioned. So this idea of having the purpose, material positive impact on society and the environment, in addition to profits being baked into the DNA of the company. There's new types of companies from social purpose corporations. Benefit corporations is the model that has become most popular. So this is like a C corporation or S corporation or LLC. You have a benefit corporation where the company has sort of an articulated purpose in sort of the DNA of the company, so to speak. These companies also must be accountable. They have a fiduciary duty to these additional stakeholders. And I think tremendously important is be transparent. Again, this is, Louis Brandeis, the Supreme Court Justice, sunlight is the best disinfectant. So I should also note that while this idea started in the US, it's actually taken off outside the US even more. So the benefit corporation idea is passed in a number of different US states, most important being Delaware, which is sort of the home of US corporate law, but also, passed in Italy, Colombia, Ecuador, Canadian province of British Columbia. Other countries are also, in the process of adopting this benefit corporation form. So that's, I think, very important. I think also the idea of B corporations is now over 50% of them are outside the US. And my estimation is that actually the center of gravity of this movement is in the process of shifting to Europe and South America. So while it started as a US phenomena, I think that because the sort of general economic systems in Europe and South America are a bit more sort of stakeholder driven, not a sort of Wall Street short-term driven, that actually will be where the center of gravity of this movement turns. Regarding that, I want to say sort of a third pillar is working together. So, companies can do this on their own, but actually through collective action and through collective effort, this really takes on a power, beyond just one company. So this idea of sort of the center of gravity shifting to Europe and South America, why I say that is because, also this summer, a new sort of network and organization around these sort of social purpose B Corps as large companies has been developed. And 6 companies have signed on to this. Danone, as I mentioned, Natura, which is a Brazilian cosmetics company, well known for its longstanding social and environmental impact. recently in the last few years acquired The Body Shop and Avon, so very big $10 billion company now, as well as two other companies from Brazil, a steel maker and a retailer, and two other companies from Europe, a fragrance and flavor company, and also a vegetable producer. They all have joined this program to actually work together to implement these stakeholder management tools and processes originated in the B Corp movement. And I think there'll be tremendous learning among these companies, and then also provide frameworks for other larger companies to implement this as well. So additionally, around this working together point, I think another key set of priorities is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And the UN Sustainable Development Goals are these sort of really, as we all know, incredibly important priorities for the world to accomplish or to address in meaningful ways by 2030. The thing is, these are actually not operationalized tremendously well for business. They're societal level goals. Obviously, business, as was mentioned in the earlier presentation, but business really is bigger than many countries, largest businesses in the world. And so one of the things that B Lab, the organization behind B corporations, has done is worked with the UN to actually synchronize a measurement tool with the SDGs so that companies can see how their businesses line up with different SDGs. So that's another way to sort of really work together and collectively. And finally, the fifth pillar, which I'm going to close on, that's sort of the shortest in some ways, is all of us, as consumers. The SDG 12 is the idea of responsible consumption. And I'm sure there's business leaders on the line thinking about how through their products and services, they can help their consumers, understand why responsible consumption is important. But all of us, not just as the businesses we lead, but also as individuals, we need to think about consciously and redirect our own spending. I know myself, I try very hard to do this, but I know I can do better. And so sort of as a last word, just want all of you to take from this presentation every day as you go through buying things, services, products, how can your little decisions play a greater role in the development of a sustainable economy? So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. This was great. First of all, how we go from wording to facts. And second, why all of us? We are all responsible and also very powerful. Thank you very much for your contribution. And also, thanks for making, this route, this roadmap so clear, so helpful for all of us, no matter the format or the size of our companies. And you said this is the moment of the CEO, is the leader who really opens the way. And the next speaker is an expert on this issue. She works with the most powerful CEOs in the world to help them perform better at all levels, especially moments of change like this one. From San Francisco, ladies and gents, senior partner at McKinsey Company, Carolyn Dewar. Caroline, welcome. It's very, very early for you in San Francisco. Thanks a lot for accepting this invitation nonetheless. Caroline, this is the moment of the CEO. Tell us why. The floor is yours.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Antonella. What an extraordinary collection and convening that you are all doing on such an important topic at this time. So thank you for bringing us all together. I think we'll hear a lot of similar themes as we go throughout these conversations because they're so resonant, right? The themes are so clear and are so strong. I think the focus of our research, as we've been talking to hundreds of CEOs throughout the pandemic, is bringing it back to the personal, the very personal role of the leader. What is the leader's role, whether CEO or other important leader in their organization? What is the role only they can play in advancing all of these critical priorities? And what we found in the conversations is that some of the lessons learned through this pandemic were born of necessity because of the extraordinary circumstances we are on. But there is a moment or there is an opportunity, an invitation for leaders to say, What have we learned that we want to carry forward? What are the lessons that have served us well that we want to take beyond the pandemic into the future? Let's not revert back to the way things were. Let's together reimagine and co-create a better future on several dimensions. We're going to share today, some of these perspectives of how CEO leadership itself is evolving. There's obviously been dramatic changes in corporations, as we've talked about throughout these words, right? Having to pivot to serve the needs of many constituents throughout the pandemic, preserve livelihoods and jobs, preserve lives through healthcare and important safety measures. Well, what is this unique CEO moment and what will we carry forward? There were 4 main learnings that we heard very consistently as we talked to leaders. Let's show the slide. The 4 main learnings, and then we'll touch on each one, is this invitation to aspire higher, aspire 10 times more boldly and faster. The second one is around elevating your to-be list to the same importance as your to-do list. So leaders not just thinking about what they do, but who they are and how they'll be. The third point will be very familiar to this group, all about fully embracing stakeholder capitalism. And what is this irreversible step change that we've seen to really bring that to action, take it from words to action? And the last one, again, very resonant with this group and the wonderful conference you have, is harnessing the real power of peer networks. How have all of these connections that have been made through the pandemic, how will we carry them forward in a very intentional way? If we take the first learning around aspiring 10 times higher, I think all of us would recognize that corporations were able to achieve extraordinary things, especially in the first few months of the pandemic. Right? I think about, the CEO at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. They typically had been doing 30 telehealth visits a week, 30 remote health visits between a health practitioner and the patient. By the end of April, they were doing 5,000 a week. So this massive shift to digital healthcare, which they had thought would take 5 years to accomplish, they accomplished in 8 weeks. Of course, there were extraordinary circumstances that forced that change, but they did it, and they've done it in a sustainable way. We look at other corporations and CEOs who pivoted their organization's production to actually make new products, whether it's health equipment, ventilators, whatever was needed. Automakers were on the way for pivoting their auto manufacturing to ventilator manufacturing in a matter of weeks. I mean, these are extraordinary changes that happened quickly. And while I don't think any of us want to continue to operate at the level of adrenaline that it has taken over the last few months, we're noticing CEOs now stepping back and saying, we prove to ourselves, to our organizations, to our employees, that we can move more boldly than we ever thought possible. Now that anything is possible, what will we choose to do? So how do we take that learning of how quickly and boldly we had to move and apply it to things that we want to do? Right? What are these bold aspirations? And there's really 2 flavors of it. The first is about thinking boldly. And I think we're seeing a lot of CEOs saying, what did we previously think was impossible that we now might contemplate? Right? The technical limits have been shattered, right? There's this great unfreezing moment where all of the constraints that we thought were true, all of the assumptions we were making have been challenged. So what will we apply that to? And a number of CEOs are applying it in the broad stakeholder and social purpose realm, right? We had always thought that we couldn't both produce and be environmentally conscious, or we've always thought that we couldn't move to digital and also preserve jobs. Those assumptions are being challenged, and CEOs are asking what is possible. And I think the second exciting thing they're asking as they aspire 10 times higher is not just what we're going to do, but how we're going to work. And again, these assumptions have been challenged. How will we make decisions more quickly? Whose voices will we listen to in those decisions? How will we align and mobilize our organization to operate in new ways? And I think it's raising real questions about how we organize ourselves to deliver on these things. You can easily imagine a move towards flatter organizations with less levels, right? More quick access between very senior leaders and folks who are doing the work and have the insights from the customers and their constituents. We're seeing a flattening of that decision making. We're also seeing an increased metabolic rate, an increased speed. Instead of waiting for annual planning, people are making decisions now. They're not waiting to shift resources. They're making bold priorities of what they're going to achieve, whether it's in redesigning their products, going after new constituents, working in new ways that satisfy all of the multiple stakeholders, and they're holding themselves to those. Right? So what will we do in sprints of 1 month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, as opposed to what will we do for the year? So this dramatic kind of reimagining of both what we do and how we work is one of the very biggest themes that we're seeing. And you can imagine that being applied to the social realm. The second theme around elevating to be at the same level as to do, this has been quite striking. I think CEOs have often thought of their role as making decisions, unblocking things, consulting with people, helping convene and make things happen. And what they've really been aware of and noticed is their organizations and their communities are looking to them for more than that. They're looking to their leaders in terms of who are they as humans? What are their values? What is important? What are the behaviors that they will role model? CEOs are role models, whether intentional or not, right? They act through these extraordinary amplification systems, and people take their cues from how they show up and the energy and the tone that they set from the top. One of my CEO clients felt almost ministerial during the pandemic. They felt like they were holding the conscience and the soul of their organization because they literally had people's lives in their hands, and they took that responsibility very, very deeply. And they were also conscious of the attitude and the tone that they set, and that spirit will pervade in the organization. Are they setting a tone of optimism? Are they setting a tone of resilience? Are they setting a tone of innovation and imagination? One CEO that I work with has their typical to-do list, their calendar of events for the day, and they have a column down the side for every day where in the morning over her coffee, she sits and she writes, "How will I be today?" And it's not always the same words that she puts on that list. She looks to see the activities she has that day, the types of conversations, the types of work that she'll be doing. And she says, what are the important character qualities that I will need to bring to today? And she's very intentional. She writes it down and she sees it throughout the day as a reminder, because she's really conscious that her ability to lead and to influence and to add value is as much about who she chooses to be as a leader as what she does. That extends to the broader leadership team. So I think we're seeing a lot of CEOs really challenge and say, what are the behaviors that have served us well in this period that will serve us well as we go forward with our aspirations? Do I have leaders on my team who have an external orientation? Do I have leaders on my team that are able to look around corners and see what might be coming next? Do I have leaders on my team who are able to work together across silos to get things done and not let their own ego and vertical point of view get in the way of the extraordinary changes that we have to make? And I think some leaders are evolving and thinking about the composition of those teams going forward. Who are the voices to have at that table? And what are the behaviors not only do I expect of my leaders, but what are the behaviors that I will not tolerate? And there's a harder line too about short-sighted decisions and things that just won't work in this new world, and making it very clear to those leaders and to the broader organization that those behaviors are not okay. So some of the big shifts we're seeing in leaders, but also broadly in the organization as they work towards these exciting priorities, are working across silos, right? So not putting together almost agile teams of people from multiple disciplines to solve really difficult problems, and working together in a low ego way towards a common goal. So we've heard it in a number of these comments throughout the speakers today, but how do you anchor on a purpose, a common North Star that becomes your rally cry that brings the organization together? And so it can be much more about the team working together than the individual components. That's a huge breakthrough. And I don't see people going back. I think people have caught a flavor for what that can mean and what they can accomplish when they work together in those extraordinary ways. And I'm not seeing a lot of energy wanting to go back to the old way. The other piece I would be remiss not to mention has been this shift from working together in person to working together in a remote way. And you can imagine now a further evolution towards a hybrid model, right? There's a general understanding that, we're not going to snap back to all being in person 5 days a week in our little offices with 4 walls. And this move to a hybrid model where we're working really fluidly with people across geographies, across formats, can be quite an opening to opportunity. You think about the people that you're able to bring together when you release the constraint of being physically in one place. You can tap into a broader group of stakeholders, a broader group of talent, and how are we going to use that newfound flexibility with creativity and with abundance? I think there are some warnings or lessons learned in doing that, especially if we move to a more of a hybrid model where some folks are working in person, some are working more remotely. How do we make sure there's not inequity that comes from that? You can imagine if a small group of people are physically together all the time and there's some that are just zooming in or joining remotely. How do we make sure we maintain the equal voice that's really important, and that we don't get bias in our decision making, and that we don't swing back to a mode where we're a little bit blinkered in our view? But I think this move to a hybrid model is quite exciting if we're really intentional about it. The last two I'll hit on perhaps more briefly, because they're so in keeping with the themes of these 3 days you're spending together. But it's exciting to see that when we asked CEOs about the 4 biggest shifts in their leadership, number 3 came out in that list, unprompted, right? This recognition that as a leader, they need to fully embrace stakeholder capitalism. It's no longer a choice. And there's just a broad recognition that it is the role of corporations not just to serve their shareholders, but to serve all of their constituents. And that they are so interdependent that even if you wanted to, you can't ignore it. Right? I think during the pandemic, it has made it so clear to everyone that the fortunes and the aspirations of a company is inextricably linked to the fortunes and the health and the wellness of their employees, of their customers, of the environment, of the global geopolitical framework. You saw that with the disruption in supply chains. Right? We can't pretend we're islands because we're not. And I think CEOs have had that really driven home, that all of these things must work together, and that if your employees and your teams are not healthy and safe, both physically healthy, mentally healthy, feeling supported and nurtured, how will they then produce goods and services for a customer and a set of communities that are not healthy and nurtured? And you saw companies making really interesting trade-offs and important decisions, putting their money where their mouth is in terms of this broad need, right? Pivoting the work that they're doing and how they're working together. I come back to the Cincinnati Children's Hospital, which I know we mentioned at the beginning. They had a brand new children's hospital. They hadn't even started using it yet. Everyone was all excited to, take off the packaging and get in there. They quickly pivoted that entire hospital for use, two uses. One, for COVID patients, adult COVID patients, which it was never meant to do. They opened it up to be used by other hospitals that needed that space and that specialness. They also had another facility which they quickly pivoted and used for some of the people who'd become unhoused during this, where it wasn't safe for them to be on the streets. It wasn't safe for them to be living in the circumstances that they were in, and they created housing. I mean, these were in no way in keeping with the typical, in America, profit-driven, aspect of healthcare. But it was the right thing to do, and it was the right thing to do for their community. So we're really seeing people put their money where their mouth is and shift from just talking about stakeholder capitalism to really doing it. I think there's been a number of questions, practical questions on, well, is this all just for this moment? Will that snap back? Will shareholders, when the chips are down, demand us to come back and say, no, this is really your job number one? And I think we're seeing a shift, not only with CEOs and leadership teams, but with boards as well. Really understanding the longer term view and the broader ecosystem that they're operating within, and thinking about how they bake that in, as we heard from the last speaker, into the measures of success for a company. So it's getting hardwired into the work that they do, as opposed to being a nice to have over here on the side. Maybe we'll touch on this last piece again, probably quite near and dear to the hearts of folks who've convened for this group. But this idea of harnessing the real power of peer networks. Right? There have been a lot of CEO forums over time, right? You have local business chambers of commerce, you have the CEO roundtable, you have industry meetings, all of these things, and people would go and they would be helpful. I think, almost to a T, these organizations have seen the level of participation and engagement dramatically rise during this period of pandemic. And I think CEOs and leaders are realizing the power of working together with their peers, both in those more formal settings where they're able to have roundtables and discuss, and also informally. One thing that's interesting that we've heard is not necessarily wanting to hear from CEOs who've been through past crises, whether it was the financial crises or even crises before that. I think the CEOs of this generation very much felt like this was a set of circumstances that no one had dealt with before. And so it wasn't just going back into history books. They had to navigate and invent this path forward together. And we're quite bold in reaching out and convening on big questions, not only of the pivots and the survival of their industries, but how they were going to balance the competing expectations and priorities across stakeholders. You think about, some of the industries that had to quickly pivot to be able to stay in operation. Or I'm here in the Bay Area, some of the technology companies who quickly work together to help enable all of the remote work that we're doing together. And I hear CEOs asking three questions. One, as they go forward, on what topics was this convening really powerful? What are the topics that I want to make sure I continue to get ideas and analogies and exciting ideas from my peers on? And if those are the topics that are important, who will I convene with, right? And it's not just the usual suspects. It's people sometimes in other industries that are further ahead, or where we can get analogies that we have learned before. And then how will I be intentional about that? How will I not go back into my little, world and lose this broader view that's been really accelerating? So again, each of these themes have been born of necessity, right? Thinking boldly, elevating to be, fully embracing stakeholders and networking with your peers. I think the invitation or the challenge to CEOs is, how will we reinvent the role going forward? What of this will we take forward to reimagine a future that's better and more exciting, not just for us, but our communities and the societies in which we work? Thanks so much, Antonella.
Thank you. Thank you very much. These ideas are very, very inspiring. Now that anything is possible, what do we want to be? What do we want to go? Thank you very, very much. This talk is so dense of fundamental ideas. All these talks are, recorded, and that they are available for you in the YouTube channel and also in the webpage of CERES Foundation in the following days. So no need of worry. Anything is available and available for everybody of you, and for their, broadcasting every way in the social networks. And now we close the day with Rebecca Henderson. Rebecca is John and Nettie MacArthur Professor at the Harvard Business School. She's been teaching for years a very successful course that is now also a book, Reimagining Capitalism in a World of Fire. We have seen her shining 15 days ago at the TED Conference Countdown, a planetary event with an audience of 15 million people. And she's today with us, ladies and gents, from New York, Rebecca Henderson. Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Antonella, thank you. I'm honored and delighted to be here. And it's been a privilege and a pleasure to see the previous presentations. I've learned so much, and I'm so encouraged by how much energy and change is in the air. So let me see if I can wrap up. The good news is we share a common diagnosis, a sense that for too long business leaders put their heads down, maximize shareholder value, and said, you know, climate change, the environment, that's just an externality. Inequality, that's somebody else's problem. I'm creating jobs. Why should I worry? And now I think we have a shared sense as a community that while it's very easy to focus on me and right now, it's really important to focus collectively on us and later. So that's very good news. And we have another piece of really good news, which is that the idea that we should become purpose-driven organizations, that an orientation towards our stakeholders is no longer a would-be nice, but a requirement. As we've heard from Daryl at CECP, telling us that the CEOs in his group are on the case, that they understand this, that the whole conversation in the US is changing. As we heard from Chris, and Chris pointed us to the importance of measurement and how talk is cheap. And the best way to make sure that we really become purpose-driven firms is to measure, both for our own use as we run firms and also for investors, because we must rewire finance. And that's another fantastically good piece of news, is it's clear we need to rewire finance. And so many of the world's largest and smallest investors understand that that's the case. The capital markets are moving. The hope of so many CEOs for so long that investors would focus on the longer term and on more than the financials is in the process of becoming a reality. And if that wasn't enough good news, Carolyn just gave us a whole bunch more good news. She told us, and Carolyn, I really hope this is right. I'd love to see this as a general rule. I was so excited by what you said, that sense of urgency and ability and resilience is not only for the COVID moment, but for now, for the challenges we face going forward. Because COVID has been an enormous blow and continues to cause huge suffering and hardship across the world. But as they say, COVID is the pop quiz. Climate change is the final exam, and there will be no vaccine. We need that energy and resilience if we are to green our economy. And fixing inequality, oh my goodness, I promise you fixing climate change is easier. We have the technology and the resources. It's relatively inexpensive. We could arrest the worst effects of climate change. And we have the technology and the resources to fix inequality. But oh my goodness, it's going to be a harder struggle. So we need every ounce of that resilience and focus. And I loved your phrase, as well as doing, we need to be. It's not only about what I do, but who I am. Because of course that is central to running purpose-driven companies. We have known for years that individual transformation is a very important part of building the emotion and the empathy and the skills that enable CEOs to both be superb business people and manage for the bottom line and generate profits, because can't crash the company. It's vital to give a decent return to investors and build the kind of collective understanding and sense of purpose and authentic mission that is the beating heart of the successful purpose-driven company. So lots and lots of good news. But here's the rub. Building purpose-driven companies can be only the first step. I believe that even if a third of the companies in the world really embraced purpose and really took it to heart, that yes, that would make an incredible difference, but it would not solve the problems that we face. That in the end, there are some problems for which there is no business case. And so what I'd like to talk about just briefly is why might purpose be also really important as a catalyst for solving the broader systemic issues we face. My own sense is that the research is clear, that to solve massive public goods problems like climate change and inequality, we need to build societies that rest on three foundations: a strong, competitive, engaged free market, and also a democratically elected, transparent, accountable, capable government, and to hold them both in check, a strong civil society, an independent media that tells the truth and lets people know what's really going on, an independent judiciary that enforces the rules, strong representation for employees so they're not at the mercy of ever larger companies, and knitting them all together, a strong civic culture that says we're in this together, that none of us can succeed without the other, that if we are to build a just and sustainable capitalism, we need the free market, but we need the guardrails that keep the free market pointed in the right direction. Because yes, purpose-driven firms can raise wages and create high-road employment systems, increasing productivity and innovation as they do, but it's going to be easier if everyone raises wages. And firms cannot alone fix the issues that we face in education and healthcare if everyone is to have the chance to compete. Yes, purpose-driven firms can reduce fossil fuel usage and drive the transition to a renewable economy. But, you know, transforming the world's economy to be carbon-free, to transform transportation, buildings, agriculture, and electric power and distribution, that's a huge job. Without an active, competent business engagement, it's going to be almost impossible. So, if that's what we need, if we need the three legs of the stool, purpose-driven business, government, and a strong civil society, how can purpose-driven business get us there? Of course, one of the things we need are massive political and cultural movements across the world to put this into place. And I think we can all see that those are beginning to emerge. But I believe purpose-driven business has a central role to play. Why? Firstly, because purpose-driven businesses demonstrate that new business models are possible. So many people say to me, Rebecca, you sound great, but if it was that easy to make money and do good, everyone will be doing it. Well, of course it's not easy. I think it's a transformation, like the adoption of digital technology. It's a completely different way of thinking about businesses and their purpose, and it takes time and energy to work it out. So purpose-driven businesses going first, taking those first steps, can say to everyone else in their industry, come on in, the water's fine. And they can drive technologies down the learning curve, make entirely new ways of doing things, not only the right thing to do, but absolutely the obvious thing to do, as is already starting to happen in clean energy and in plant-based meat and in, I could go on, but it's already starting to happen. What else can purpose-driven firms do? Well, they can collaborate. Nearly every speaker has said collaboration is key to moving forward, and it is. Because if I can't improve the quality of the education in my local region, maybe I can work with all the other firms in the region, and together we can make a difference. Maybe I can't use only sustainably grown palm oil because it's too expensive. But if all my competitors use sustainably grown palm oil, then I'm not at a competitive disadvantage from doing so. And together we can make a real difference with respect to deforestation. So purpose-driven firms and their business models become the seed point for effective collaboration. And more than that, because collaboration is super hard, they bring what an economist would call an irrational commitment to doing the right thing to those collaborations. They are firms you can trust to follow through. And that's what collaboration needs. How else can purpose-driven firms help catalyze the change we need? Well, Chris was all over this. Forgive me, Professor Marquis was all over this. Measures, measures, measures. We need for every firm to publish not only its financial metrics, but the measures of the impact it has on the world. My colleague George Serafim just published a very rough first pass set of impact measures for 1,800 large firms. And his team's first pass analysis suggests that for a third of those firms, the environmental damage they cause is greater than their profits. I'm sure that number isn't quite right, but even if it's roughly right, there's nothing like measures to drive change. If you know that as a manager, if your customers know it, if your employees know it, that's the kind of driver of change. And of course, if you're going to make progress, you have to measure the progress. How else might purpose-driven firms really help to drive systemic change? Well, they might be partners with government. It's very easy to say we need public-private partnerships. They are super hard to do, as I'm sure anyone who's on this call knows from their own experience. But businesses that are firmly committed to doing the right thing, that have a broader vision of what is needed, that understand that they cannot get where they need to go without government, make better partners. In the textile industry, for example, the large textile firms of the West work together for years and are continuing to work to try and get abuses like child labor and forced labor and sexual abuse out of their supply chains. Super hard. In the end, they are deciding that only with change in local governments, with better enforcement of labor regulation, with better enforcement of minimum wage, can they drive the kinds of changes that will lead to a robust and just supply chain. So purpose-driven business can help to drive public-private partnerships and perhaps even institutional change. Because how are we going to rebuild those three foundations I talked about? How do we grow and support democratically accountable, transparent, capable government and a strong civil society? Well, one of the ways we do it is we get business out of politics. In too many parts of the world, the political regime is captured by the largest firms. In the US, some of the fossil fuel companies spent hundreds of millions of dollars denying the reality of climate change and funding politicians dedicated to opposing environmental regulation. Other funds, heavily funded politicians who pushed through massive tax cuts, and that made it much harder to fund issues like education and healthcare. So as business leaders, I think we need to rediscover our boundaries, that there are some things business does really well and some things government should do well, and that paradoxically, business needs to lobby to stop business lobbying. Let me close on one final note. And this is really aspirational. If you think I've been utopian so far, watch this. This distinction between to do and to be that Carolyn talked about, that I think many of us have found ourselves turning to in the middle of this pandemic. The visceral reaction that it's not just about running as hard and fast as we can, not about piling up as much stuff as we can, that we are crucially interdependent on everyone around us, and that in the end, what matters are other people and their health and well-being, and that in the end, that is where so much of our joy comes from. So perhaps purpose-driven business can help drive the kind of worldwide cultural revolution we need to take care of each other at scale. We have the resources and the technology to build a just and sustainable world. We even have a sense of how to do it. All we need to do now is keep pushing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rebecca. Joy is what you give us when we listen to these fantastic ideas. I wanna, point out two of them. I mean, purpose as an element that will help us to solve the systemic problems of the planet. Isn't that a purpose for us to create? And also irrational commitment to do the right thing, because something irrational is here, and it's true. Metrics are important. We got George Sefferin this summer with us discussing this metric model, very, very important. But most of all, we need to be able to throw our hearts beyond the obstacle, and this is what you say to us, and we can't take this message completely. So here we are. We have discovered that despite the crisis, or maybe because of the crisis, we have a huge opportunity to change. A company which is more committed with the whole society, and its employees, its clients, its suppliers, its community, is not much more equitable, is also much more resilient, and in the medium term, much more prosperous. Change is not easy. We know this. Maybe it's messy, but it is possible, and it is necessary, and it is urgent. Anyway, all these talks will be online in our YouTube channel and the webpage of CERES Foundation. I want to thank our partners, Prodigioso Volcan, for the technical production of this event. I want to thank you, Europa Press, our media partner that is covering this full event. See you all tomorrow, 9:30. I will switch to Spanish. Nos vemos mañana a las 9:30. Vamos a entregar los premios CERES 2020, por primera vez en virtual, en este nuevo formato. Y veréis que no vamos a echar de menos la presencialidad para nada, porque las ideas son tan buenas, los proyectos tan grandes y la capacidad de ilusionarnos sobre lo que somos capaces de hacer como sociedad, como personas, como empresas es enorme. Con lo cual la pregunta será, ¿cómo podemos hacer si siempre? No solo durante una pandemia. Eso es de lo que vamos a hablar mañana. Y van a hablar los protagonistas. Nos vemos a las 9:30. De verdad, merece la pena. En este mismo link. Thanks and goodbye.